All right, I wanted to touch on a little bit about how certain chords look when they're on the manuscript. We've been talking about a lot about chords in terms of how you play them, which is good. But I think it's really nice to be able to grow the skill of actually being able to notice them. So, make sure. As soon as this starts, my screen share stops working. What is that about? Okay. I'll just have to do it this way. So we just lose the keyboard for now, but it's okay. So we probably know the most standard chord, which is our C major chord. Okay, most chords in root position will be thirds apart. And when notation is thirds apart, it's generally going to be line, 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 or space, space, space. So they're going to skip something in the order. Does that make sense? In how it's written. Okay, so this guy's our major third, and this guy's our minor third. And another, I just left. Another way of looking at it is that's also the perfect fifth. All right, so I really want to make sure that we're starting to grasp the notion of intervals as well. Intervals being the distance between two notes. Does anyone have any questions on that? No, you all know how to build chords, at least to a basic degree. That's good. So we got our major third, which is 4 semitones, and our minor third, which is 3 semitones. You could also just say 2 tones for the 4 semitones as well. That's also completely fine. And we obviously know when we are looking at a minor chord, it's going to have a flattened third, and that's relative to how the major scale looks. Okay, so in C major, our natural third is an E natural, and when we have a C minor, the flattened third is our E flat. And then, as you'd see it on sheet music, it's just as written. But as sort of we've been talking over the past couple of weeks, the notion of inversions, very important. So this is going to be your root. This will be first, and this will be second. Okay, so all that's happening is we're just placing the bottom note on the top, etc., etc. And the way the chord symbol will look will be like this. Yeah. So there's playing the inversions in your right hand, whilst potentially the left hand is still playing the root note, which is our C. But then there's also sometimes the song actually calls for an inversion, which is to say that the lowest note in the song is going to be either the E or the G. Okay, so usually we go to play inversions due to trying to find an easier way to navigate between certain notes to the next chord, okay, rather than just playing in root position. Otherwise, you're having to jump around the piano quite a bit, and it gets a bit uncomfortable. All right, same thing with our C minor. So I could write it like this. I could write it like this. That flats. Just to sort of randomly sidetrack onto key signatures and sharps and flats and how they apply when notated on sheet music, the sharps and the flats last for the entirety of the bar if they're not within the key signature. Okay, so if there's an accidental that's being put into the piece of music that doesn't exist in the key signature, and it's thrown into the one bar, it will only just be contained for that one bar, and then the next bar gets reset. Is everyone pretty clear on that? Yeah. And then, unless of course halfway through the bar there's a natural sign to cancel that flat or sharp out. Cool. Alrighty. Then we've got. It's just our basic chords, which I'm sure you're all aware of. This is our C diminished. Diminished are symmetrical chords. So we've got our minor third here and our minor third here. And just to go back to our C minor, this is a minor third, generally showcased by a little m. And then we've got our major third, generally by a capital M. So the diminished chord being symmetrical means that you could keep inverting it and it actually becomes a new chord each time, because a C diminished chord if I invert it and place the C, well, actually not the C up the octave, but it becomes symmetrical once I add the seventh to it, which we'll get to in a second. So, jumping ahead. And then our C augmented, which is just a sharp 5. So it's just a C major, but instead you sharpen the 5. Anyone have any questions on those chords? Yeah? Great. Nah. Give me information. Oh, it's a dreary day, isn't it? Wild grey Monday. I don't know. It feels that way. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just...
Oh, no, it is. I was out earlier.
Yeah,
It's been
I'm like,
raining.
looks a bit grey. That's if we're all in Melbourne. Cool. So we start to build sevenths, and sevenths is just, again, going up thirds through the chord. So all I'm going to do is skip a space and then draw the next line. If I just do that right now, we've got a C major 7, which is also can be drawn as C major 7. Okay, and that's with our, there's that seventh there, which is a semitone underneath the root note, an octave above. Okay, any questions on that? Nice open sound. Still the sound of a tonic chord, so still the sound of like home bass. It doesn't really generate too much tension, so it doesn't really want us to move anywhere. It's generally the sound that we'll get when we're planted in the beginning of a chord progression rather than sort of in the middle of a chord progression. If I do this guy, we get C minor, major 7. Okay, so we've still got the major 7 interval, but we also have the minor third. And that's this sound. Everyone happy with that? Very kind of spooky. Starts to get into like LA Noir sort of sound. Nice to generate a bit of tension. Generally we found in a song of minor tonality rather than major tonality. Alrighty, but more commonly you will find C, E, C minor 7. Generally songs that we're going to come across when it comes to pop and soul and R&B and that sort of stuff, we're generally going to find the minor chord with the minor 7 interval, okay, which is 2 tones below the octave above. Sorry, 1 tone. 1 tone. Depends how you look at it. Rather than counting up, I just rather go find my octave and then just work down 2 semitones. I think that's a nicer way and quicker way to work it out. So then I've got C, E flat, G, B flat. 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and then that's just my C minor. Very kind of slightly ambiguous chord, and we do find it in more soul R&B tunes because it generally doesn't, has a bit more of a relaxed sound to it, doesn't generate too much tension. Might see if we can find an example of that a bit later. And then let's keep flattening things. Here we have our C, half diminished 7, more commonly referred to as a C minor 7, flat 5. So I've got my C to flat 3rd, I've got my flat 5, and I've got my flat 7. There will be times where you do see it with the circle with the sort of dash through it, which is to say half diminished. But conventionally, it makes more sense to think of it as a C minor 7 with a flattened 5. Just kind of is a bit more logical. And generally, we're going to find that chord preceding a dominant chord of some variety. 5, 1. So it's a leading chord. It's trying to get us somewhere. And then we do again. More flats. flats. For those playing at home, when we see a flat, two flats next to each other, it's what we refer to as double flat. Nothing too fancy. And I'll just show you what the double sharp looks like. It's going to be, go on. Go on. There we go. It's beautiful hot pink. Why not? So it's double sharp. Double sharp, two semitones. Double flat, two semitones lower. Everyone happy with that? Pretty logical. Nothing crazy. Now, our C, this is our C diminished 7. It will always look like that. Actually, in terms of how it's labeled, it can also look like that. C dim 7 or C circle 7. Either or. And that is that. That is our very classic trope kind of horror. And that little bit of shtick. Now that chord is symmetrical. So I have a C diminished 7, and I apologize the keyboard's not working in terms of the visual. This is my C diminished 7. If I bring the C up an octave, I get an E flat diminished 7. If I bring the E flat up an octave, I get a G flat diminished 7. They're all equally spaced apart because there are 12 semitones in the sort of musical series. And at the moment, each of these notes are divided by 3, okay, which is our minor third. If I just keep shifting it up, it doesn't necessarily become an inversion. It actually kind of just becomes a new chord. And what I'd encourage you guys to do would just be jump on the piano and play your full diminished 7 and keep getting the lowest note and putting it up and up and up an octave. And you'll find that, it's just easier because you can visually see it. But you'll find that the sound, you get a feel of the intervals being equidistant rather than it being an inversion. Questions?
Is because it's only doing the first inversion, is that how like it's becoming a new chord each time instead of really like an inversion? If you did like a second inversion, then it would look a bit different. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. No, that wasn't the answer.
I was like,
Yeah. You got it.
yeah.
Sounds right. Can you see the keyboard?
Yeah.
So here's my, I'll play it with one hand. That's my C diminished 7.
Mm-hmm.
I'll bring the C up an octave. I wouldn't call this a C diminished 7 over E flat. I just call it a new chord. Right now, it's an E flat or a D sharp diminished 7. If I bring that up an octave, it's a G flat diminished 7. Mainly because the diminished chord itself is so ambiguous that usually when we have an inverted chord, it's telling us something. So if I move from C to C over E, I can clearly hear that I'm still in the tonality of C major, but the bass note is leading me somewhere. But the diminished chord itself really is this sort of mystical, ambiguous chord that gets shoved in between dominant chords and tonic chords to get us somewhere. And kind of what I label it is really dependent on what's come before it.
Okay.
That's sort of classic kind of 1920s. There's my C sharp diminished 7. Yep, cool. I'll just head back to my muzak. Main take home though is that the diminished chord, every note is equidistant from each other. Cool. All right, let's touch on our C6, which is just what I played then. C6, C major at the 6th scale degree. Yeah? There's our 6. So I'm playing a C major, and then I'm going to add number 6. Super easy. Any questions on that? Nah. Great. Your 6th chord, sorry, well, no, it's not technically a 6. It's a C6, which is different to a 6, because generally when I'm talking about numbers, I'm talking about how it fits in the chord progression as a whole. This is going to be a tonic. It's either going to be the start of a phrase or the end of a phrase, and is traditionally going to be found in your 20s, 30s kind of repertoire anyway. Let's see if I can find this. Sometimes you'll find it in 50s music. Makes sense. So they've kind of pulled that sound from the ukulele sound of sort of, this is going to be so wrong phrase, but like maybe someone else can find this. What is it? What was I looking for? I want to say hula music. That's not right either. I'll do some research and I'll get back to you. So I actually know what I'm talking about.
Tropical.
Oh, Daniele. It's always just got to be mildly racist at least once a day. Cool. All right, here's our C minor 6. Again, you're going to find that in a tonic. Sort of like a maybe 40s, 30s. Mostly like your French blues sort of stuff. Cool. So we haven't touched on probably one of the most important, I would say, which is our dominant chord. This is our C7, referring to it as the dominant chord because it's based on the 5th scale degree of F major. And this chord is actually diatonic to F major. It belongs to F major. It's kind of connected. If I hear a C7, I'm going to want to hear the tonic, which is F. Okay, so when I refer to C7 as a dominant chord, I'm both referring to how it's functioning, which is to say the way the role that it plays, and the role that it plays is to pull and create tension, so that I can feel the tension moving back to the tonic chord. But it's also a dominant chord because of the 5th scale degree, and every scale degree in a scale also has a particular word associated with it. And the most important being scale degree 1 is referred to as our tonic, and scale degree 5 is referred to as our dominant. So I'll sort of use that interchangeably as we move through it. Cool. So I can, if I want to, keep building on this. C, G. I'd want to find nicer ways to play it, but this is how they exist in a theoretical realm.
Oh.
Yeah?
I just looked up and I was like, oh,
What's happening?
Oh, shit.
that's not normal.
That's not normal. Correct. And there's also a much nicer way to play a C11, which that's when we start to touch into voicings. How to play it on the instrument is actually different to how it exists in a more theoretical sense. And I'll do one more. C, E, G, B flat, D, F, A. So I'll play each of these for you. Just get a visual octopus fingers. Yeah. Octopus fingers.
Oh God.
Let it be known. That's all right. 2 hands. Great. It's magical. C7. Just to give you a bit more understanding or context. There's my C major. And I'm actually... I know, I'll keep it on the screen. C major. C7. C9. C11. C13. And I'm sure we know this sound. Generally associated with quite orchestral stuff. See if I can... Quite romantic. And I'll just jump over to the keyboard so you can see what I'm playing a little closer. So I'm pulling from a romance kind of romance period or sound, Debussy or Ravel, but we can still see it in that 40s Broadway sound as well. Generally, it's the same color, but at times, due to style and energy, the tempo might be picked up a little bit. It might actually be paired with a xylophone, and I'll just find that for you as well. Because why the hell not? Usually we hear etc. I don't know what that was. But usually from an orchestration perspective, they're generally combined. There's the vibraphone and the xylophone with the right layers. And just to give you a bit of kind of clarity with how I'm thinking about these chords, I see the C7, but the thing is, when you're playing a dominant chord, this is where the magic happens, because you can actually apply any of those notes that I was referring to, the flat 7, the 9, the 11, the 13. You can throw them into the mix, and it'll still have the core job, so to speak, of creating that dominant sound. Its job is to create tension. The more notes you add to it, the more tension you're going to create. And you can draw out the idea. And this is in terms of phrasing. So when I think about grammatical or harmonic phrasing in a piece, I'm going to think, how can I generate more tension so that, I mean, constantly as a musician, as a writer, as an orchestrator, I'm constantly thinking, how can I generate more tension and then release, tension, release, tension, release. And you guys do it all the time through song and through text and through breath and through acting. It's exactly the same thing, but with music we can do the same thing. So when I'm playing the C7 with a 13 business going on, all I'm thinking about is this C7, and I'm thinking of a D minor. Just thinking of that D minor, because if you look, the D minor is on the top. So you can actually look at it as a whole full 13, or you can look at it as 2 chords. C7, D minor. And you're actually, from an improvisational perspective, if you played a bit of C7 in your left hand and played some D minor in your right hand, you'll sound super fancy very quickly. Because all you're doing is playing the extensions. The extensions are the 7, 9, 11, 13. But you're playing the special ones, the very colorful ones that not everyone gets to hear all the time. And not everyone knows about. So, I'll just throw a bit more information at you guys. Generally, the chord, when we're shaping this chord, we generally don't share the voicing. We don't share the 11 and the 3. We try to avoid that they're in the same voicing together. And I'll try to show you why. So this is my C7. When I have to go back 2 steps for a second. So this is my C major. When I move the third to a fourth, that's a C sus4. C suspended 4. Okay? C F G. When I move the third to a second, it's a C sus2. This is very very apparent in Pasek Pole sort of stuff. And then they also play with the third in there as well. Does that make sense, guys? So major, suspended 4, major, suspended 2. It's just a different sound. And it's creating more ambiguity and playing with the sense of tonality by going, you know what, I'm going to take out the third and suspend the chord. And you're going to want to hear that resolution, but, you know, maybe I won't go there. Now, when I'm playing that C7, and I add the 11, bonus points if you can tell me why we don't want to share the 11 and the 3 in the same chord voicing. You guys can see the piano, right?
They clash?
Yeah, cool. There's an inherent clash. 1 is saying, the third is saying, this is a C major chord, happy days, this is homeland, like, awesome. The F is saying, actually, I want to suspend and create a bit of tension here. So they actually have opposing views, so to speak. It's not to say you can't do it. It's more to say that if you do it, you know, you gotta choose wisely. I've had people ask me to put it in orchestrations before, and I don't know. I was so just torn. I was like, really? It's like, put the 11 and the 3 in. Why not? I was like, oh, okay. I did it because, you know, got to listen to your boss, right? It's a tangent. Now, main point there is I'm going to get rid of the 3. Just play my C, G, B flat. Maybe my F in my right hand. Cool, I've got a C11 here. You know, you could also refer to it as a C sus7 if you want to, because I'm not doing much other fancy things to it. Generally, the main reason for that is because if you have a 9, the assumption is that you're playing the 7. If you have an 11, the assumption is that you're playing the 9 and the 7. If you have a 13, the assumption is that you play the 11, the 9, and the 7. So there's an assumption there that you're playing the previous notes. Right now, I'm not playing the 9, so I would actually refer to this as just a C7 sus. But add the 9 in there. Cool, I've got my C11. Now, can anyone see a chord that's embedded into that?
B flat major.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so now I'm actually just going to play around with C in the left hand. And with my right hand, I'm just going to play with some B flat sort of stuff. So I'm still delivering the sound, but I'm removing the C root from the right hand. Don't need it. Makes me sound a bit daggy. I know it's sort of buried in there, but I don't want it there. I want this sound. This is the sound of like, you hear it, where do you hear it? You might hear it like it's the beginning ideas of like kind of your Oscars sort of sound, but it's also, if I add the 13 on top of it, we start to get the sound of a more soul Motown. If you listen to like some Dinah Supremes or I don't know, Marvin Gaye or something like that. So then we get the sound. And then in a lot of, I guess, neo-soul sort of repertoire, going back to our C minor 7. A lot of these pieces tend to move in semitones as well. All I'm doing here is just moving around the C minor 7 chord and moving up and down between the minor third. I don't know why, just I feel like it. Cool. Questions?
You said something before about the fifth in every chord is always the dominant. And what did you say about the third? You said something about the third and about the fifth of like any chord, like the positioning.
Yes.
Like what that goes to.
Yep. The keyboard's still up, isn't it?
Just repeat that.
Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
So, the sort of beginning ideas, I'll try to give you sort of the seeds of that idea. The first take home is that when we play a scale, each of the scale tones has a number associated with them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Number 1 is referred to as our tonic.
Yeah.
And number 5 is our dominant. But the first take home there is that if I said to you play the tonic of C major, play the tonic scale degree of C major, you'd play C. Play the dominant of C major, you play G. If I said to you play the dominant chord of C major, you'd actually play the full-fledged chord of G7.
Okay.
So it's to say that I can build it's more about pulling from the fifth scale degree of the scale or the key rather than the chord itself.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
So generally,
Yep.
you find any seventh chord, B flat, I'm going to make it a seventh, so it's B flat major with a minor 7 on top. This will resolve down a perfect fifth.
Yeah.
Everyone happy with that?
Yep.
This is going to go down to which note? I mean, it's a crude example. It's pretty crude, but that's like we're sort of getting into like classical repertoire. The main essence of Western music is that the whole components of Western music is that it's a constant pull between 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, and every composer and orchestrator goes, how can I make this? How can I increase the tension without the listener perceiving it? Because we get used to a sound like that. We're kind of like, that's old business right now. So we're constantly trying to find new ways to pique the listener's interest. And that's where subdominant chords come in, passing chords come in, inversions, resolve. Or go to my A flat over E flat. I like to play around with multiple endings. Like, Daniele, enough. I was doing impromptus, the improvised musicals. Like, Daniele, it's the end. It's the end of the show. It's the end of the song. No, it's still going. Cool, guys. We'll leave it there, and feel free to shoot me through any questions. But thanks for joining me today. Really nice to see all your faces. And Yeah. Our next session is Wednesday for beginners. It's kind of loose distinction between beginners and intermediate. It's more that we'll sort of skip ahead a little bit quicker with the intermediate stuff. But with the beginner stuff, it's really about I'm going to spend a bit more time on reading rhythms. So really being able to like look at your music and go, how am I going to divide this phrase? How am I going to subdivide it? How am I going to read it? The rhythms themselves might be a bit simple, but I'll try to find some more complex ones that we can inject into our intermediate class too.
Cool.
Thanks, team.
Dankeschön.
Thanks. Bye.
Ci vediamo.
See ya. Everyone's bilingual.